Good morning, and I am back, as I usually am every month, in sunny Milton Keynes. It is actually sunny today, at Wargames Workshop for a bolt action tournament run by the Outriders MK. Today's game is a 750 point game, so I thought I'd try something a little different. I usually build my lists around having quite a few big infantry squads, and they're usually regular, and I might squeeze in a veteran squad or an inexperienced squad here or there to be a bit more interesting and have some versatility. But what I very commonly see is quite a few players, will go with all veteran infantry, 3 or 4 squads of just veteran infantry. And because that's so common and it's something I haven't done before, I wanted to give it a go, and the 750 point game today gives me the perfect opportunity. But because this is more of a competitive type list, not necessarily hyper competitive, but that it leans in that direction, or it can do. I thought I'd send my list off to Bo Mortensen, who is another YouTuber who does far more competitive gameplay reviews and tutorials than I deal with, but I just thought it'd be interesting to have his point of view. And he posted his review this morning at something like 4 o'clock my time, good old time zones having that effect. And so rather than me talking through my list, I'll let him talk through my list and we can see what he has to say. Okay, good morning. It is very early o'clock, and I've just noticed as I dragged myself out of bed this morning that Bo Mortensen, as you see on screen here, has posted the review video of the army list that I'll be using at the game today. Glad that it's come in just in time, because I get to kind of see his point of view before I play, and maybe that'll affect how I play. And there's some inefficiencies in going for completely veteran, but there's also some inefficiencies in my choices, and I'm sure that Bo will immediately pick out a few of those, because he is a far more experienced player than me and a far more competitive player than I generally am. I mostly play for fun. So some of the things that I'm going to predict he's going to point out, I think it's fun to make some predictions. He's definitely going to point out some stuff that I don't know. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing that. He's absolutely going to point out some of the inefficient choices that I've made. Shotguns for the Marines, light machine gun for the airborne, and the presence entirely of the chaplain. Those are inefficient choices. But without any further messing around, let's get stuck in. Let's play the video and see what Bo has to say about my list.
Hey. While I wait impatiently for the WTC lists to be released, I can go through my backlog of to-do. So I've received a couple of emails from newer-ish subscribers. The first one is from Ed of ED-SKaR's YouTube channel. Link is in the description. Where he paints minis and talks about miniatures. Sort of like this, except not as competitive. Ed describes himself as a casual player who would rather be having a laugh during a game than holding a trophy.
True.
So let's see what he is thinking of bringing to an event that he's going to. This is it. US Reinforced, 8 order dice, 750 points. 8 order dice is not high. It's in the low end of competitive 750 lists.
I think for this particular event, we have a limit of 10 order dice. So I could have gone for a few more. But again, because I'm going full veteran, veterans are expensive, and so that's probably why I'm dropping down.
US Reinforced, I think Americans are a good way to go if you're just getting into going to events. If Americans are a good starter army, they're a very strong competitive army as well. You can absolutely win tournaments with Americans. I don't agree with the veteran second lieutenant, though.
Yep, I saw that coming.
3-man veteran. That's a lot of points you're sinking into that one dude.
Yeah, it is.
For a third, you could get a single inexperienced lieutenant. And
I wouldn't go inexperienced, I think.
That will be worth it. You might want to consider, if you're running a 3-man team, which I've seen Danny do sometimes, running one of them with a rifle and one of them with a submachine gun. The last one, you can sort of decide which one you want to take.
Yeah, I'm actually using... My lieutenant model has a Thompson. Both of the assistants are running rifles for the longer range.
Veteran US Marines. Again, with the veterans, I think at 750 points, veterans is a luxury that you possibly cannot afford.
I wonder at what point he'll cotton on to the fact that everything is veteran.
over 300 points on your lieutenant and 2 marine squads. That's a lot of your points being sunk into this. And having that many submachine guns and shotguns, that you're doing that because you painted the models, aren't you? Because it's definitely not anything that's competitive at all. Americans do really well with rifles because of their national special rules, the move and fire. The second unit here of veterans is, though, perfectly set up. It's a 7-man unit, 2 BARs. Chaplain, again, he is okay. He doesn't do much, and almost never does anything real, but he does allow you to bring a very cheap order dice. I think you could do one better though, bringing the War Dog, the U.S. Marine Corps War Dog. More infantry squads. Again, a good skirmisher squad here, veteran infantry, a veteran paratrooper squad with stubborn and a light machine gun. Ed already noted down that he knows that the light machine gun is no good, but he's bringing it because he just painted it.
Playing more regularly, that paratrooper squad would be a third infantry squad with 2 BARs, and I would be running 3, because that is really what the US does very well in bolt action.
We all know that painted models, especially recently painted models, do way better on the tabletop, so that's a +1. So all in all, lots of points being sunk into infantry, some of them being sunk into infantry small teams that are not very efficient.
Yep,
a sniper team, veteran, that's always good, very survivable, and a Stuart light tank. Veteran, so the gyro stabilized version. I would personally never run a Stuart like this, not ever. I don't think the gyro stabilizer is worth it, points for value, because it's still just a light anti-tank gun. Most of the tanks you're going up against will just shrug that off.
In a 750 point game, I'm suspecting that +4 is going to be enough. I'm sure there's going to be someone who's going to bring a Panther. For the most part, it's going to be armoured cars like tanks, maybe a medium tank squeezed in. 750 points, you often don't see the bigger tanks. And so light anti-tank gun's probably enough. It's not a great choice, but it's probably enough.
Which I think a Chaffee would actually be beneficial. That would also give you some anti-tank, much needed anti-tank capability, because you don't have a bazooka in this list.
Well, thank you very much, Bo, for having a look at the list. I haven't shown his entire video here, just to save a bit of time, so I'll leave a link in the description below for anyone who'd like to see the full version. Aside from reviewing competitive lists, he also talks tactics and looks at tournament results. So if you're into competitive or tournament style games, pop over there, there is plenty of good stuff. But for us, let's look at my first game of the day, and would you believe it, I'm up against my regular first time opponent with their Polish. 3 months in a row now. The mission is to hold 4 objectives at the end of the game, and as you see, 2 of them are on opposite corners of this building. Meaning, whoever holds the building has a massive advantage for winning. With my limited numbers, I really have to stick together, but I don't want to risk getting stuck in the building early on. So I'll choose a flank and force my way down, and then turn towards the middle at the end of the game. A simple plan, perhaps, but it just might work. And so I sent my infantry favouring the right-hand side. At first I used run orders to get the advantage of this cover, and that may have been a mistake as my opponent didn't move into the open ground here. Had I been maybe a little slower, my opponent might have pressed forwards and so I could catch him in that open ground. Not that I wasn't rolling really well for shooting, but eventually I just had to advance into the open and pour my superior firepower in at close range. This was a risk, and this sort of thing has been a mistake for me in the past, but I have learned and I sent everything in together rather than one by one. At the beginning, my opponent stacked their armour on my left, and so I sent my Stuart out alone to face them, more to really just tie them down than to have a fair fight. Somehow I kept hitting, but rolling terrible for damage, stacked out quite a few pins on their tank, but the Stuart didn't actually take out anything and was lost in the end. The Polish cavalry did take the objective, but from one unit, just the Stuart, I had tied up 3 of my opponent's units for the entire game and made them fight for the objective that I was pretty much just going to let them have in the first place. The building in the middle was where the real upsets happened. I got to deploy my sniper in the rafters, which gave me a very good starting hold on both of those middle 2 objectives. As quickly as possible, I got the airborne into the ground floor, and my plan was for them to sit on ambush, not shoot out at all, but to threaten 2+ shots to anything who got too close, or tried to charge in. Well, this little squad of Poles charged in before the airborne could get the ambush order up. 6 regulars versus 6 veterans who also have the benefit of being in cover. This should be a terrible plan, right? Well, no, they won the combat and kicked the airborne out. Good job to them, I guess. I quickly noticed that their howitzer had been placed just so perfectly that it covered the open ground where my infantry would have to cross to get to the building, which really stayed my hand for far too long. It wasn't until the very last turn of the game where I finally broke cover, risked the howitzer, and forced my way back into the ground floor of the building. With only 1 turn, the howitzer can only take 1 shot, and even if the enemy squad in the building won the first combat, it was not likely to win 3, but I did knock them out of the building, and I scored those 2 and the one on the right, leaving the left for their cavalry, but securing the win for myself. The second game for me is on this city rubble board, pretty horrible for me to move up through and really limited my firepower as everything gets heavy cover most of the time. There is 1 objective for each player. The opponent's just off the top of this photo because I can't take good pictures. I felt I only really had a good chance of pushing up so far, maybe to the road in the middle, and at that point I could just shoot anything that advanced towards me. And this meant that I was forfeiting actually trying to get to my opponent's objective in favour of kind of aggressively turtling to protect my own. Boring as it may seem, this game went pretty much to that plan. My opponent tried a good tactical push on my right side, but I was able to shift enough over to slow it down. They brought a Piat and an anti-tank grenade equipped squad, a little too close to my Stuart for comfort. Now I could either run away, which would have been the sensible choice, or what I usually do is just get within 2 inches and shoot them. Which I did, and I missed everything. And then the Piat also missed, and the anti-tank grenades came so close to destroying the Stuart, but didn't quite manage it. There was a sneaky enemy squad that ran around my left, and they could have caused me a whole lot of hurt, but because of the rough ground of a city full of rubble, they were just slowed down so much that they couldn't get there in time. As the game ended, neither objective had been fallen, and so it came down to the victory points of wiped out units, and even then there weren't many, but I did just scrape through a win. For my last game, doesn't this board look familiar? The same table and even the same side of the table this time. Now my opponent was someone that I haven't played against in a little while, and is one of the better players at the local tournament. We realised after the game that the 2 of us were on the top table. Both of us had 2 wins each, and this, our last game, would decide the scores for the day. Our mission, however, was totally awful for me, especially on this board with the list that I've brought. Double envelopment means you have to get across the board and off your opponent's table edge, and your opponent is trying to do the same right back at you. My minimal numbers and the heavy rough ground and the fact that I only have 1 vehicle, good grief, this would be impossible. Totally impossible. Well, I may as well not just give my opponent an easy game, so I decided to spread outwards from the middle and lash out at anything that tried to get across the board. If anything managed to survive, I'd have a go at pushing forwards later in the game. My opponent favoured my right hand side. Just like in the last game, it must look tempting from that side of the board. Now I had enough infantry to hand that I pushed sideways towards them, but it was really my Stuart who fought this off. With the roar of an engine and the bark of a 37mm, I took out the toe for their howitzer, which had been trying to just race across the board, ignoring the fight and scoring points. Machine guns blaring, they took out an infantry squad, and another anti-tank gunshot lifted the turret of their Daimler armoured car. The destruction was real, and once again, my Stuart stole a handful of points from my opponent. And once again, it got taken out, actually by the artillery gun that's right there next to it. In the middle of the board, the last of my infantry had stacked up a bunch of pins, rolled snake eyes, which means they drop all of the pins, and they managed to charge recklessly forwards to fire at point blank range into and missed everything. Well done. Which was somewhat of a problem because on my left, I had tried to be sneaky. My LT here ran up the further side of the board, far from my opponent's units. I did bring my airborne in to sort of support them, but this is mainly because they kept failing the reserve roll and only turned up towards the end. My opponent only sent one infantry squad off to stop my officer, which should have been enough, but between the long-range shots from the airborne, the sniper, the remains of my marines, and a whole heap of luck, I managed to get enough pins on that unit to prevent them from moving, which left my LT free to score points by leaving the board. And finally, my opponent's universal carrier with a flamethrower-armed engineer squad on board, they nipped over and wiped out the airborne and the marines, and the last models of the last infantry squad as well. The only models I had on the board at the end was my sniper, and the only scoring units from getting off the board was my officer. However, I did manage to knock out quite a few of my opponent's units, including their Daimler and officer, which was scoring bonus points for this mission. Remember how I said that we realised we were the top table and whoever won this game would win the day? Well, we totaled up the points, mainly wiped out units, but he got a couple of units off the board, and there were a few bonus points as well, but we realised we had come to a draw. With 2 wins and a draw each, we were actually still ahead of anyone else, and we had the Wargame tournament equivalent of a photo finish, and our total victory points from all 3 games were added together to see who would win. My total was about 25, and my opponent 30. Well deserved, of course, well fought, and one of the better players at our group. But that sort of means that I was doing quite well with my all-veteran American list. I certainly see the value in playing with this type of list, and I might give it another go sometime, although maybe I'll not be quite so extreme and clear out some of the inefficiencies. The chaplain and the officer weren't the best. I'd downrate the LT and replace the chaplain with probably a light mortar. The infantry, especially as Americans, charged up, got close, and were able to gun everything down without just instantly being cut down in return. Partly that's the veteran bonus at work, but partly it's due to me keeping them together. But the real MVP, pulling its weight in all 3 games, was the Stuart. It tied up and distracted a whole bunch of Poles, and then it tied up a whole bunch of supposedly capable anti-tank units, and then it blocked up a push that could have scored a lot of points against me. Good little Stuart, I really like that one. So as I came second, I got a good pick of the prizes, so I chose this Jagdpanzer so I can do a video on building it sometime. And speaking of videos, do check out Bo's video reviewing my list. I did cut it back quite heavily so as to not just use his whole video in mine. And of course he has loads of other videos on tournament type games, lists and tactics. That's all for this month. I remind you to go and play games, casual or competitive, whatever you find fun, at the local nerd shop or on your kitchen table, wherever you can. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.